Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I've got some helpers up here. I want to first of all thank the Darien Library for once again hosting and helping us promote this wonderful speaker tonight, Jonathan. We've got some other people to thank. We've got our SEPAC reps and our chairs. We've got Courtney Darby, Trisha Bresnahan, and Jamie Cyanek. These ladies have put in so many hours. All volunteer, people have got jobs. It's really impressive, and I just help out once in a while. I want to thank the Darien teachers who are here, administrators, any staff, so thank you guys for coming. I know the last thing you want to do is come to another meeting. What I want to also give you just a couple other things. We've got some upcoming presentations. We've got one on ADHD and executive functioning, October 10th at 1:30. It's going to be Dr. Mary Murphy, a clinical psychologist. We'll be getting more information on that. We've got another one November 4th at 9:30, once again at the library, Effective Reading Instruction and How to Get It by Cheryl Knapp. And then we've got one in January, and that's the Child Mind Institute, who's many of you've come to our presentations, and this one's Understanding Social and Performance Anxiety. So if anybody wants to get information who's not on our email, please sign in the back, or at the table in the back. And then one thing we always forget, take a survey, fill it out. You can do it even while you're sitting here. It really helps us plan our programming. So if you don't mind doing that. Even if you don't feel like doing it, you want to shoot us a quick email through the our Gmail account, the SEPAC account, we'd really appreciate that. Other than that, I just want to let you know before we have another little presentation, but our format's going to be about a 45 minute presentation, and then we're going to do some question and answers. So thank you. And here's our next portion. I think we're going to quickly wrap off the 3 books, correct? Before. Okay, my helpers are going to, if you have the ticket that matches the number, just raise your hand and my helpers will run the book out to you. Would you like to pick the first number, Ryan?
Okay.
Hand it to Mrs. Cyanek. You could probably read it more clearly. Okay, the first number is 182006. All right, yay. Henry, can you take the book over, please? All right, Agnes, do you want to pick the next one? That's okay.
Swap. And the number is...
You want to read it?
182015.
Good.
Oh,
Gisela. Ryan, do you want to take the book over?
That's Gisela.
Okay.
Come on, get moving.
All right, great. So Henry, Gisela.
yes, please.
All right, and the third is 182031. All right, Agnes, would you take the book over? Thank you. And over here, sweetie.
Marcello's mom.
Oh my God.
All right, and now my helpers have to go home and go to bed.
Well, no, wait, they have one more part.
Huh?
They have one more
Oh,
part.
that's right, they're going to wait till the end.
Yeah. Okay. Now comes the time where we get to introduce Mr. Mooney. So, as a child, Jonathan Mooney was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD and did not learn to read until age 12. He faced a number of low expectations growing up and was told he would flip burgers, drop out of school, and end up in jail. Didn't happen. Instead, Mooney attended and graduated from Brown University with an honors degree in English literature, is a Harry S. Truman Scholar for Public Service, and was a finalist for a Rhodes Scholarship. He's a widely sought-after writer and speaker whose work has been featured in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and a number of other publications. Mooney is the author of 3 books. One we know now, and you'll hear a little bit about in a second. The award-winning writer, entrepreneur, and activist offers the message that we should stop trying to fix people and start empowering them to succeed. When Mooney realized he wasn't the problem, but the system and the concept of normal were, it changed his life and outlook. He argues that we can change the ways we think about diversity, abilities, and disability, and we can start a revolution. So, we would like to introduce, who is it?
Jonathan Mooney.
That's right. And what does Jonathan Mooney think? Ready? Jonathan Mooney thinks?
Normal sucks.
Now go to bed. You guys are going home.
Boom. Get in there. You love it. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It was awesome. Okay. How y'all doing? My name is Jonathan Mooney, and it sucks to be the guy who has to speak after those phenomenal young people. Can we give them a big round of applause? Oh, well, what an honor to be here. Before I do my thing, I have just a few pieces of housekeeping, if you will bear with me. First and foremost, I am not going to use a microphone. I'm going to use what my third grade teacher called my outside voice. And I want to make sure that works for y'all in the back. Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Second piece of housekeeping. Would love to give you a sense of how I'd like to spend our time together. You know, I read recently that the average human attention span is about 15 minutes. And then I heard that the average attention span of somebody on a Tuesday at 7:30 in the evening is about 15 seconds, right? So I want to assure you all that I'm going to respect that research, keep my talking at you down to a manageable minimum, and make sure that we set aside ample time to talk together in the form of questions, conversation, and dialogue. Does that sound like an okay way to spend a Tuesday night? Okay, third piece of housekeeping, and this is important for me because I've spent my life advocating for inclusion, and I'm a big believer that people have to make any learning experience work for them. So I know that I'm not alone in being somebody who does not sit still very well. So I want to empower you, if you are like me, to do whatever you need to do during my presentation to have a good experience. If you need to go to the back of the room and pace back and forth during my talk, that's cool. I won't be offended. If you need to leave the room, no problem. You know, I myself may wander off in the middle of my presentation. And you all will be accepting, inclusive, and accommodating of that, I'm sure, right? But in all seriousness, you need to text, that's cool. You need to pace, that's cool. Do whatever you need to do as a unique learner to have a good learning experience together tonight. Okay, last piece of housekeeping. I know it's a lot, but this is, frankly, the most important piece of housekeeping. I want to give a quick shout out to the folks who put this on. I want to recognize the good folks at SEPAC, but I want to put my thanks in context. You know, building a more equitable and inclusive world is the social justice issue of the 21st century. And it's folks like the volunteers and their volunteers with professional, personal, and busy lives. It's volunteers like that who are the front lines of making sure we have a world that doesn't just work for some people, but works for all people. And that deserves a big old round of applause. Can you all do that? Okay, with all that said and done, let me get right to it. I was asked here this evening to share with you all two things. On one hand, I was asked to share with you my professional experience of being an advocate for young folks who live and learn differently. And that's really all I've done in my professional life. So I was asked to share tonight the core values, the educational practices that I fight for all around the world. But I was also asked here tonight to share with you my personal experience, because everything I've done as an educator and as an advocate has come directly from my own experience of struggling in school because of learning differences. You know, I did struggle. I was the kid who had such a hard time sitting still that I spent most of the day chilling out with the janitor in the hallway, right? I was the kid who had such a hard time keeping his mouth shut that I grew up on a first name basis with Shirley, the receptionist, in the principal's office, right? And I was the kid who had such a hard time with reading, and specifically a torturous time reading out loud, that I spent most of my high school experience hiding in the bathroom to escape reading out loud with tears streaming down my face. As you heard in my introduction, I did not learn to read until I was 12. Couldn't read until I was 12. Growing up, I had every label you can imagine. You know, I was called the bad kid, I was called the dumb kid, I was called the at-risk kid, and then eventually I became the special ed kid. I was diagnosed with a continuum of language-based learning disabilities in 4th grade. I was diagnosed with a whole bunch of executive functioning and attentional disabilities or disorders, ADHD and others, in 5th grade. And I dropped out of school for a year in 6th grade. That year when I left school, I struggled with a number of mental health challenges. I struggled with anxiety, with depression, and I had a plan for suicide. I spent about a year in and out of a variety of educational settings. I went to special education programs for a minute. I went to alternative schools for a second. And then if I'm honest with y'all, I went to no school. I was at home just sort of rebuilding a sense of self, a sense of efficacy, a sense of value as a human being to face down adolescence. So when I got into middle school and beyond, as you heard, there were all sorts of low expectations that surrounded me. You know, I was told I'd be a high school dropout. I was told I'd be unemployed. I was told by a teacher my senior year in high school that I'd most likely end up in jail or incarcerated. So I was asked here today to talk about how I transcended those low expectations, how I went on a very different journey than the one that was predicted for me. Because opposed to being a high school dropout, as you heard, I became a college graduate. I graduated from Brown with an honors degree in, of all things, English literature, right? Opposed to being unemployed, I ended up writing books. First book I wrote as an undergraduate at Brown when I was 21. And opposed to being an inmate, you know, I became an advocate. Somebody who has dedicated his entire life to making the world a better place for folks who live and learn differently. So I was asked here tonight to talk about that journey. And I was asked here this evening to answer a very valid question, a question that may be in your mind that journey often brings up. You know, I'm asked by moms and dads, I'm asked by educators, I'm asked by students themselves, hey Jonathan, how'd you do it, right? How could you go from a 6th grade dropout who had a plan for suicide at 12 to an Ivy League English major, published author? How'd you do it? What drugs did you take? And where can you buy some, right? I know that's the question on y'all's mind, and that's the question that I want to answer today. I want to talk about what made a difference in my life, and I want to share with you what I know after 20 years of working with young folks like me, what makes a difference for people who live and learn outside the lines. That's what I want to do this evening. But not only do I want to share that very practical information with y'all, I also want to challenge the subtext that's often underneath that question I'm asked. Because when people come to my story and say, hey, how'd you do it? Really what they often want to ask me, if they were being honest, is, hey, Jonathan, how did you fix yourself? Because there's a deeply held, a cultural narrative that people with atypical brains and bodies, for them to be okay in the world, they got to stop being different. We pathologize these forms of difference, and then we've created an industrial remediation complex to fix these forms of different. And that's not my story. My story is very different. What I believe in is not the pathology model, but celebrating these as forms of human diversity that have value to the world. My story isn't the story of fixing. I'm still dyslexic. I'm still ADD. I struggle with a whole bunch of academic skills to this day. It's not a story of fixing, but a story of being empowered. And that's what I want to talk about with you tonight. What does it mean to wake up every day and put into practice, as a parent, educator, an empowerment model for young folks who learn and live differently? That's what I want to share with you tonight. So when I think about that, there are three things in my life that constituted empowerment. Three things that educators who made a difference in my life, my parents when they were doing right by me, three things that they lived every single day. So let me start with the first, the most important, the beginning and middle and end of empowerment. Empowerment starts when we redefine who or what we call the problem. You know, for most of human history, the difference has been called the problem. You know, we value this myth of a normal brain and body, an idea that emerged within the Industrial Revolution when there was a cultural imperative to standardize human beings. And if you deviate from that idea of normal, something's wrong with you. We put the problem in the difference and turn the person with a difference into a problem. I know that very personally. You know, I remember when I was first diagnosed, right? And the school psychologist called me and my mom into her office to give us the information. It was obvious the moment we walked into that room that everybody thought we were getting terrible, tragic, bad news, right? You know, the lights were down low. There was soft jazz music playing in the background. There was a box of tissues on the table because everybody thought we were there to mourn the death of my normality. We've turned differences into deficiencies, and we put the problem in the person. But the reality is, the problem isn't with the difference. The problem is in the interaction between difference and context. That's the problem. Let me use my life experience as a way to illuminate that paradigm shift. Let's take this thing we call ADD, right? Read all the research literature, read the testing. It sounds like Jonathan has a problem in his brain. But the reality is, this thing we've called ADD is a difference in the truest sense of the term. A difference with challenges, and a difference with strengths and gifts. I'm not naive about the challenges that come with having my brain. I struggle with executive functioning. I struggle with organization. I have explored the feasibility of stapling my car keys to my forehead, okay? I got that. Those are very real challenges, but do you know what goes hand in hand with those very real challenges? A whole bunch of very real strengths, gifts, and talents that we don't talk enough about. You know, I came across a research study recently that showed that people with atypical attention are more entrepreneurial and better problem solvers than the general population. Came across a study recently that showed that EMTs, emergency medical professionals, firemen and women with ADD are better at their job than so-called normal EMTs. That makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, your house is on fire. You want that dude to have ADD, right? I mean, forget paying attention. Come get my cats, you know? So it's a difference with some good things about it, with some challenges about it. It's not my problem. My problem was the school desk. How in God's name could a school desk be a kid's problem? Well, let me immerse you into my relationship with the school desk, and it is a fraught relationship, right? You know, for some kids, school desk, not a big deal. It's a benign piece of school furniture. For me, the school desk might as well be a form of enhanced interrogation that would make Dick Cheney proud, okay? This is my experience at the school desk. First grade, 12th grade, Brown University. If I was in a classroom tomorrow, this is how it goes down. I see that desk, I see that chair, and before I even sit in it, my hands start to sweat. My face gets all red because I know after 5 seconds at that desk, the foot's gonna start bouncing. 10 seconds at the desk, both feet start bouncing. 15 seconds at the desk, oh, I'm gonna bust out the drums, right? 15 minutes at the desk, it's all over. I'm the kid trying to take his leg and put it behind his neck, right? And that young person is shamed for that behavior because we have deeply ingrained institutional norms that conflates or confuses being the good kid with being the compliant kid. And if you're not the compliant kid who sits still and raises their hand and keeps their mouth shut, well, something is wrong with you. You know, I got that message at home. I grew up in a good old school Irish Catholic household. So every night at the dinner table with my father, it was, Jonathan, stop it, stop it, stop it. What's wrong with you? From my dad. And I got the same message in some of my classrooms. Not all of my classrooms, don't get me wrong, but some of them. I'll never forget, I had a teacher in 2nd grade. I've had many brilliant teachers in my life. My 2nd grade teacher, Mrs. C, is not one of those, okay? She would stop class, she would point at me, all the kids would look at me, and she would say at the top of her lungs, Jonathan, what's your problem? If I had a nickel for every time I heard, what's your problem in school, I'd be a rich man today. We put the problem in the person. We make the difference a deficiency and disable it by our actions, our practices, and our institutional norms. Because ADD wasn't my problem. It was the idea that the good kids sit still, and ultimately, it was the social shame and stigma that came from being called the problem that really held me back. Let me give you one of the best examples of that social shame and stigma that I've seen. You know, I spent a lot of time talking to young folks. And back in the day, I gave a talk in Green Bay, Wisconsin, to 3rd graders. And I walked in to give this presentation, and from the front of the room, I could see in the back of the room a set of boxes made out of bookshelves about 3 feet tall. So they had taken these bookshelves, they made a box about this big. And in one of the boxes, I could see a head bouncing up and down. It was one of the 3rd graders in the box jumping. Now that's not a sight you see every day, so I turned to the teacher, and with all due respect, I said, hey man, what's up with the box? You know, what's going on? Guy looked at me with a straight face, not a hint of sarcasm. He said, Jonathan, that's Jack. I said, you have a Jack in the box? Are you kidding me? They put poor little Jack in the back of the room in a box, right? Hey, I don't gotta belabor this point. You know, ADD ain't Jack's problem. The box is Jack's problem. The teasing is Jack's problem. The social stigma of being labeled the bad kid, that's the problem. Difference, disabled by context. The same is true with my so-called learning disabilities, right? People come to my story all the time and say, hey man, that must really suck to be dyslexic. And you know what? It doesn't. It's all good, you know? I'm not naive about my reading challenges, you know, and the challenges that come with my brain. I still struggle with reading. I read in the 12th percentile. That means that my reading rate is the equivalent of somebody in 5th grade or so. I spell today at a 3rd grade level. I still struggle with writing even after 3 books. I confuse who and how, horse and house. When I went to Brown University, I thought the university offered a course in orgasmic chemistry, okay? Imagine my disappointment on the first day of that class, right? So hey, I got it, you know? These are very real challenges, right? But they also go hand in hand with a whole bunch of very real strengths and talents that we don't talk enough about. Do y'all know that 50% of small businesses in America were founded or are run by somebody with a language-based learning disability? 50%. The engine of the American economy is intrinsically linked to people who struggled with reading and writing. So it's a difference. It wasn't my disability. A lot of folks come to my story and say, hey, Jonathan, you overcame dyslexia. No, if I overcame anything, it was dysteachia. That's what I overcame. I overcame being made to feel stupid because I didn't have the reading brain. That's what I overcame. And that's what held me back. You know, we have a very narrow definition of what constitutes intelligence. We confuse or conflate being smart with being good at school. But y'all know those are different things, don't you? Don't know about you, but some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, they didn't read well, they didn't write well, they didn't do school well, but guess what? They could rebuild the car engine from scratch. And that person is just as smart, just as intelligent, and just as valuable as that person with a PhD. And the flip side is true. Some of the stupidest people I've ever met in my life have had PhDs, right? Can't get to the supermarket, you know? We have elevated one brain at the expense of all the other brains. We have decided to call that brain smart and that brain not. And that leaves so many people out. And not only have we elevated at the macro level school and intelligence and confused the two, at a very young age, you are smart if you read. And if you don't have the reading brain, you find yourself in the dumb group, right? You know, I know that that's a school phenomena, but we got to be honest, that's also a cultural phenomena. I'm the father of three, so I spend a lot of time with other parents, and every time I'm hanging out with other parents, all I ever hear is how smart their kids are, right? Everybody's got a genius on their hands in Santa Monica, California, you know? And how do they know they got baby Einstein at home? It's always the reading. You know, I hear things like this, you know, my kid's so smart, they're reading chapter books and they're in first grade. Oh, my kid's so smart, they know all their letters and they're in preschool. Oh, my kid's so smart, they know phonics and they're in utero, right? It's always the reading. I never hear this. I never hear, hey, my kid's so smart, they're good at building, they're good at talking, they're good at connecting, they're good at caring. It's a narrow band of human faculties that we have decided to call intelligence at the expense of all the other ways to be smart. And if you don't got that narrow band of intelligence, specifically reading, you find yourself in the dumb group. Who remembers the dumb group? Anybody? Let me ask that question differently, because the reality is almost all of us, if not all of us, went to schools that had the smart group and the stupid group. Now, they didn't call it that. It wasn't inherently malicious, right? But it was there, wasn't it? Let me ask that question differently. Who remembers reading groups? Anybody remember reading groups? Can I ask you all a question about those reading groups? Was it ever hard to tell which reading group was the smart group and which reading group was the dumb group? Not hard to tell, right? You had the blackbirds over here, you have the bluebirds over here, and then over in the annexed trailer building, right? You got the sparrows, you know? Come on now, we ain't fooling anybody. Let me put it this way. When I was growing up, everybody knew that my group was the dumb group because my group was a bird that did not fly, okay? It was an ostrich and it ran quickly, you know? And I was hanging out with C-Spot Run all day long, and everybody knew that the condors were the smart group because the condors were reading War and Peace, okay? It ain't hard to tell. We ain't fooling anybody. And the worst thing about it is not only do I know I am in the dumb group, but who else knows I'm in the dumb group? Everybody else knows I'm in the dumb group. Some of the worst memories of my life were going over to the other side of the room to pick up my little book. And let's be honest, See Spot Run, not a bad book, right? Nice narrative structure, nice moral tale, but you don't want to be caught dead with Spot when you are 14 years old, now do you? Spot's going in the shirt, in the backpack, because as I walk by all the other kids, I hear, Jonathan, go back to your dumb reading group. Go back to your stupid reading group. And then I hear a word which should be, but often is not, treated as the moral equivalent of a racial slur. I hear, Jonathan, go back to your retarded reading group. A word used to demean the neurodiverse, folks with atypical brains and bodies every day in America with impropriety. And that's not right. And that's something we should not tolerate as a community any longer. But I got the message that because I didn't have this narrow band of skills, I was dumb. And that's wrong. And that's the problem, not the dyslexia. So it's not the difference, but it's the interaction of difference and context. It's the way the difference is treated. And I'll tell you, if I've learned one thing in my 20 years, it's not just ADD, it ain't just dyslexia that is disabled by the way it's treated. It's all forms of human cognitive and physical differences. You know, I wrote this book back in the day called The Short Bus. And for the short bus, I bought an old short bus. In many districts, that's the special ed bus. You know, the so-called normal kids go to school in the big bus. Kids with differences sometimes go to school in the short bus. So I bought the short bus. I drove all around America listening to people's stories. And what I heard across the board was it was the way they were treated they wanted to change, not their difference. One of the first kids I ever interviewed on the short bus was a kid named Wilson. Wilson had significant cerebral palsy. He breathed on a respirator. He had full-time health care and health needs. I asked Wilson if he had a magic wand and he could change one thing, what would he change? And here I am thinking Wilson's going to say, hey, I wish I didn't have to use the respirator. I wish I didn't have to use a mobility device. And Wilson looked right at me and said, Jonathan, I wish people didn't stare at me. It's not the difference, but the way the difference is treated. Empowerment starts with that paradigm shift. Because when we put the problem in the person, it leads us down a road of fixing the person relentlessly. But when we understand the problem's in the interaction of difference and context, it leads us down a different road. And it helps us not just think differently about the young folks that we care about, it helps us act differently. And that brings me to the second foundational idea of empowerment. And it flows naturally from redefining the problem. And it's represented by my mom. So I want to pause for a moment and tell you about my mom, because I would not be here if it wasn't for Colleen Mooney. Let me give you a mental image of my mom. A lot of folks dismissed her and underestimated her in her life, and then she was dismissed when she became involved in my journey. She was dismissed for a whole bunch of reasons. On one hand, not a tall woman, right? On a good day, in high heels, my mom is 4'11", right? Little Irish bulldog, you know? So folks kind of look down on her, right? My mom was dismissed because of her background. You know, her parents, my grandparents, they were Irish immigrants. Right off the boat from County Cork to Butte, Montana, where they worked coal mines. And then they moved to San Francisco and they cleaned wealthy folks' homes. That's the environment my mom grew up in. My mom struggled in school, but my mom was always seen as the stupid, crazy, lazy person, and never understood as somebody who learned differently. So my mom never graduated from high school. My mom didn't go to college. She had my brother when she was 16, my sister when she was 17 and a half, and my other sister when she was 19. Found herself a single mom on public assistance, so folks look down on her for those reasons. And lastly, people look down on my mom because she had this very funny, very high-pitched, squeaky voice like Minnie Mouse. My mom totally sounds like Minnie Mouse, so people dismissed her. She wasn't tall, she wasn't wealthy, she wasn't educated, and she sounded like Minnie Mouse. But people dismissed my mom at their own peril, right? Because my mother she cursed like a truck driver. And let me ask you a question. If you were a principal, a teacher, if you were anybody doing wrong by her son, did you want cursing Minnie Mouse in your office? The answer to that question, if you are at all confused, is no, okay? But that's where my mom was every single day when things were going wrong for her son. How did we know she was in that office? Because every dog in the neighborhood was running away. Only bats could hear her high-pitched obscenities. Glass was shattering. My mom understood that I didn't need somebody in my life to fix me. You know, that's that old school problem in the person model, right? And that's what educators are told, at no fault of their own. Read the textbooks, read the coursework. It's what parents are often told. But my mom rejected that. And she said, I don't need to fix my son. I need to fight for and with my son. And that's a very different thing. To wake up every day and say that you are an advocate for a child's right to learn differently. That is your job. And that is your job as an educator, as a parent. It's our job as a community to wake up every day and say we are fighting for the right for individuals to learn differently. You know, my mom believed and told me every day, a core value of hers was if a child doesn't learn the way they're taught, then teach the way the student learns. That was her guiding mission. So we need more cursing Minnie and Mickey Mouses more than ever. And we need you every day to be an advocate for that right to learn differently. So as we collectively embark on that journey as advocates, let's continue to fight for services. You know what? Services matter. You know, fair doesn't mean equal. You know, if you read in the 12th percentile, you're going to need some additional reading services. If you're somebody who struggles with socialization, you may need an aid. Those are reasonable accommodations under the law, and those are important for us to continue to fight for. But we have to go beyond services, and we have to collectively fight for accommodations. You know, accommodations is a pretty radical idea. It comes from the Americans with Disabilities Act. It fundamentally stipulates that it's not the person that should change, but the environment that should change. That we should build ramps, both literally into our buildings, but also metaphorically into our classrooms. We need pedagogical curb cuts that create access through accommodations for folks with differences. Let's fight for that. But I'll be real with y'all, you know, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I think we have to go beyond accommodations, because accommodation has a little bit of a negative connotation to it, doesn't it? You know, it's kind of like that word tolerance, you know? We tolerate something that we don't like all that much. Let me put it this way. When my mother-in-law comes to visit, I don't celebrate her visit. I accommodate her visit, right? So we need to fight for services, yes. We need to fight for accommodations, of course, but we need to fight for universal design of environments. A bold idea that we have an ethical obligation to build our institutions, to build our communities, so they don't just work for the mythical normal body, but they work for all bodies. And that's the work that we're embarked on together collectively. And when you listen to the true stories of inclusion and transformation, it's never about making the round peg fit the square hole. It's always about changing the context around the human being with a difference. Let me give you one of the best examples of that I've seen. You know, I just finished this new book about rejecting the notion of normal and building a world around the reality of different. And in writing that book, I researched all sorts of environments committed to the idea of embracing, not pathologizing, celebrating, and including human diversity in all of its forms. And in that research, I learned about this very innovative software design computer programming firm that was originally based in Finland, but is now all over the world. And what makes them unique and interesting to me is that this firm has an intentional strategy to hire computer engineers with autism or Asperger's. It's not a charity, it's a business. It's a business that sees value where other people only see deficits and problems. And that makes sense, right? Don't know about y'all, but folks on the continuum, guess what? They have strengths and talents that I don't have. They're often good systems thinkers. They're often good problem solvers. And let's be real, they're often more productive employees because they don't waste a lot of time with chit-chat, all right? Not a lot of office cooler banter going on, you know? Let's do some programming. So I was intrigued by this business and I visited one like them. And I wanted to understand, what did they do? Did they have a diagnosis remediation model or did they do something different? And the moment I went there, it was clear that they did something different. It was a relentless commitment to design the environment to work for more and more types of humans. The lights were down low. Why does that matter? Because a lot of the so-called behavior problems that come with being on the continuum are a result of overstimulation. It was a place with active working. You could sit, you could use a stress ball, you could stand, you could walk, you could move to contribute. It was a place of choice where individuals had choice over their projects and their work because we know efficacy is intrinsically linked to choice. It was a place that changed the environment, not the person. And it changed these people's lives. You know, at the end of my visit, they were generous enough to host a little cocktail reception. And I have to tell you, if you haven't been to a cocktail party with 500 computer programmers with Asperger's or autism, you have not lived, okay? You got yourself a new item for your bucket list, right? It was so much fun. It was so quiet, you know? And about halfway through the reception, I joined one of the tables, and I sat down, and the moment I sat down, the conversation ceased and stopped. And it was apparent to me that the folks around that table had just been talking about me. You've been there, haven't you? I mean, you can tell when somebody's talking about you. So I turned to one of them, I said, hey man, what y'all talking about? And the guy said nothing. Then I knew they were talking about me, right? So I said, no, I'm here to learn from you. I respect your opinion. I respect your experience. What were you all talking about? And the guy looked at me, he looked at his colleagues, he looked back at me, and he said, well, we think you're weird. And you know what? In their normal, I was. You know, normal's not a fact in the world that we discover like oxygen. It's a construct we create with our decisions, our policies, our practice. And the good news about that is, guess what? We collectively can advocate for a bigger normal that includes more and more types of human beings and is built around a relentless commitment to valuing the difference as a fundamental experience of being human. That's our work together. Not to make the square hole into the sick person, not to relentlessly remediate that person to fit a context built for the myth of normal, but to change the context around those human beings through services, accommodations, and ultimately universal design. And that's empowerment. But it's not the last part of empowerment. I told you there are three things. Number one, redefine who or what we call the problem. Number two, don't fix the person, but change the context. And last but not least, we all together have to have a relentless commitment to challenging the deficit model that surrounds young folks with atypical brains and bodies. You know, a good friend of mine is a guy named Thomas Ayer. Thomas Ayer is the former Secretary of Special Education for the U.S. Department of Education. He is now a professor at Harvard. And Thomas's research has shown that for every one strength or capacity that is mentioned in an IEP plan or a 504 plan or a response to intervention plan or whatever y'all want to call it, for every one strength or capacity or asset mentioned in those documents, they mention 20 or more weaknesses. It's a relentless deficit orientation. Imagine that being your life, you know? Imagine going home every day and having the people you love talk about what's wrong with you. Imagine going to work and having your colleagues talk about what's wrong with you. It is demoralizing when all we do is talk about what's wrong. And we have to flip the script and focus on what's right. And I'm here today because of that. You know, because of an educator who had a relentless commitment to finding the good in every single human being he encountered. His name was Mr. R, you know. He was my 3rd grade teacher. He asked every single kid he ever encountered, what are you good at? What are you good at? What are you good at? He thought his mission in life was to help other people find the passion, the interest, the talent that was missed by others. So he would ask me that question, but I was in IEP land, right? So when he asked me what I was good at, what would I say? Nothing, right? Because my strengths were never reflected back to me. We have to co-create an asset-based sense of self. It does not come out of nowhere. It's our mutual work together. So one day he came to me and he said, hey, Jonathan, I know you don't think you're good at anything, but you are wrong. He said, I've been watching you, and you are good at telling stories. You are so good at telling stories, he said, that I think you could become a writer. I was 9. No one had ever said that to me before. A writer, Mr. R? Are you out of your goddamn mind? I can't spell, man. Guy looked at me and he said, Jonathan, in my class, screw spelling. Screw spelling, man, yeah! You should have seen me jump out of my body for the first time in my life. Somebody said, put aside what you can't do and define yourself by what you can do. And that was a revolution in my sense of self, and it was a revolution in my education, and it is the reason I am here today. Because we all have been lied to. You know, us who love and live with labels. We've been lied to by those tests that only talk about what's wrong with us. We know that there are strengths and talents that don't come despite neurodiversity and physical diversity, but come directly because of those differences. It's our obligation to find and surface them. But we've all been lied to in an even bigger and global way. We've been told that the path to a good life is to get good at everything, right? You got to be good at science. You got to be good at social studies. You got to be good at spelling. You have to be good at advanced math, even though 8 out of 10 jobs in America do not require advanced math. You got to be good at everything. And that's a lie. Successful human beings, pragmatically successful human beings, but more important, philosophically and ethically successful human beings who are happy in life. They don't get good at everything. Guess what? They get good at something. And they build a life around interest, talent, and passion. And every young person deserves that and has a right to that type of education. What do they do about the things they're not good at? Well, they do what we all do. They use teams, technology, and help to mitigate the weakness and scale and build on the strength. That's what I did. You know, Mr. R was right. I'm good at telling stories. Became a writer. Can't spell. How did I do that? Well, guess what? I married my spell checker, okay? It's called strategic mating, and if you haven't tried it, you should try it, right? You know, we all do it to build a life around strength and talent. So my challenge to you all, to everybody in this room, is to be relentlessly committed to the good in every human being around you, and to see your job as finding that good, celebrating that good, and pulling it out of them and helping them build a life around it. And my challenge is, the kid you think doesn't have anything right with them, think again, look harder, because every single human being's got something right with them that they can use to build a better life. You know, I learned this from this kid named Juan, you know. Tell you about Juan real quick. One of the things I do in LA is I work with young folks who have made big mistakes in their life. And I work with them to go on a different journey. And one of the first kids that I worked with was this kid named Juan. Juan, rough kid. He was arrested when he was 13 for running a 50 50-person drug ring in South Central Los Angeles. You know, he struggled in school. He was in special education. He felt stupid, crazy, and lazy. He dropped out of school. He joined the family business. He went to jail, got out, came to my program, set aside from me, and literally looked me in the eye and said, hey, what I did was wrong. I don't want to be that person, but what am I supposed to do, he said. He said, I'm not good at anything. You know, and I thought about Juan, and then I thought, what would Mr. R do? And it was my turn and my chance to pay it forward. So I looked at Juan, I said, Juan, not good at anything? 50-person drug ring? I said, you're an entrepreneur, brother. And I was honest with Juan. I said, hey, man, we got to get you a different product, you know? We got to get you some stocks or some collateralized debt obligations to sell or something, man. But right there are skills and talents that you can use to build a better life. So Juan enrolled in a community college class to study small business development. Juan studied graphic design because he was a gifted artist misapplying his creativity onto the side of your building. And then he merged the two, and he created a small business that helps advertisers engage millennial urban youth. And Juan became the first in his family to go to college and graduate, and he became the first in his family to earn a legitimate living wage. Did we fix what was wrong with Juan? Nuh-uh. We scaled what was right. And every single human being deserves that. A strength becomes a passion becomes a purpose becomes a pathway to a better future. That's your work. That's our work together as a community. Okay, I want to conclude. And in concluding, I want to come back to what this is all about. You know, empowerment for folks with atypical brains and bodies is about redefining who or what we call the problem. It is about not fixing the person but changing the context, and it's ultimately about a relentless commitment to finding the good. But ultimately, what empowerment is about is rejecting this idea that there's a normal brain or body that human beings should have. So I want to end my time with you with a story about how powerful it is in the life of a young person to reject that idea that the normal is good and right. And if you deviate from that, something's wrong with you. And this comes from something called Adhd Adhd is a nonprofit organization that's based in New York City. I co-founded it as an undergraduate in my dorm room at Brown. It's got a very simple mission. It takes neurodiverse adults, often college students, and it matches them with younger students to give them hope for their future. It's not a tutoring program, it's a mentoring program. You're not alone, you have a bright future, you're okay as you are. So Adhd is all over the country now, but when we started it, there was only 5 of us. 5 Brown University students, 5 third graders in a room sharing our stories, you know? And I'll be honest, it was a fake it till you make it kind of moment, right? We had no idea what we were doing. We just showed up, right? And I was paired up with this kid named Robert. I shared my story with Robert for about 20 minutes, and then I took a break. And I walked around the room to observe because it was my program, and I wanted to make sure everything was going okay. And the first group that I walked up to observe, they were quite a sight to see. The third grader, his name was Philip, and Philip was a hurting kid. Philip had school phobia, meaning he is so terrified of school that he would hide under the bed in the morning, beg his grandma not to make him go. Philip was so anxious about school, and his anxiety challenges were so immense that he would rub his left eyebrow raw. So when I met Philip, he had no left eyebrow. So he's a hurting little kid, 9 years old. And then there's Philip's mentor. Philip's mentor, Brown University student named Kent Roberts. This guy is a good friend of mine even today. So when I say this, I mean it as a compliment. Kent Roberts is a complete freak show, okay? He's got a big beard down to here. He's got long hair down to here. The dude totally looks like Jesus, right? I mean, get the guy some Birkenstocks and a staff, and you got JC in the flesh, right? So we got hurting Philip, we got Jesus-looking Kent, and I walk up to them, And the moment I get within 5 feet, I hear Kent screaming at the top of his lungs at Philip. And Philip is 9 years old. Kent is screaming, "Philip, if you learn one thing in Eye to Eye, you have to learn that normal people suck, Philip. They suck." What the that's not what Jesus says, man. I mean, come on now. I am in a public elementary school. You know, I think the cops are coming next, right? So I go home that night, and I was angry. You know, I thought Kent had scarred this 3rd grader and ruined this program that I wanted to start. So I call Kent on the phone and I yell at him for about 10 minutes. "How could you say that? Why did you say that? What were you thinking saying that?" Kent doesn't say a word. Until the very end, all he said was, "It's true," and hung up the phone, right? So I'm thinking, you know, maybe, just maybe, water under the bridge. You know, no principal was present, no teacher heard it, right under the rug. Wrong. Next morning, I get a call at 8:30 in the morning from the principal of the Fox Point Elementary School, Principal Mary Brennan. And Principal Mary Brennan respectfully summons me to her office to discuss what transpired at Eye to Eye the day before. So I drive to her office thinking of all the ways I can apologize for messing this kid up. And to confirm my fears, when I get to the office, not only is it the principal, but it's also Philip's grandmother. Because Philip lives full-time with Grandma. And if I've learned one thing in my brief life, it is do not mess with Grandma, right? Because the moment I walk into that room, before I can sit down, she stands up, she points at me, and she says, "What did you do to my grandson?" I said, "Nothing. It was that Kent guy, you know?" Hey, JC or not, I threw him right under the grandma bus, you know? Never met him, never seen him before. He appeared out of nowhere, you know? She had tears in her eyes. She said, "For 3 years, my grandson's hid under the bed before school, begging me not to make him go. For 3 years, from our home to school, my grandson has been hysterically in tears, begging me to go back. But today, the day after Eye to Eye, my grandson was up early, waiting in the car, ready to go to school." What the hell did you do to my grandson? I looked at her and I said, "Well, it was my good friend Kent Roberts, right?" And you know, it wasn't me. It wasn't. If anything, at that point in my life, I was coveting normality as a way to absolve myself of the sin of being different. And Kent rejected that. He rejected it for Philip, and he taught me to reject it for myself. Because Kent is right. You know, people with differences aren't broken. The problem is this idea that there's a normal brain or body that we all should have. That's the problem. You know, normal's like the horizon. You know, you think you're getting closer to it, it gets further and further away from you. Ever since I learned from Kent, I've learned that the only normal people are people you don't know very well. Because the moment you get to know another human being, really see that human being, not for who they should be, but for who they are, the moment you see them, it's their eccentricities, it's their fallibility, it's their strengths, it's their talents, it's their weaknesses, it's their ability, it's their disability. It is their differences that constitute their humanity. So we together are fighting for a world that is grounded in the reality of human difference. A world that rejects the tyranny of normalcy and celebrates the power of different. Every single day, as moms and dads, as educators, as people who run institutions and systems, we are waking up and fighting for a world where every single human being has a right to be different. Okay, thank you all very much for listening to me talk. That was fun. Right on. We got some time for some questions, some dialogue, but before we do that, let me give you ways to be in touch if your question is not answered, or if you got to move on in your night, because hey, I know we got busy lives. It's totally cool. You got kids to put to bed. You got lunches to make, all that good stuff. So if you need to move on in your evening, no problem. Here is a few ways to be in touch with me and continue the conversation. Number one, you can come find me on all the different social media madness things. You know, the Twitter, the Instagram, the Facebook, whatnot. It's all the same handle. It's the Jonathan Mooney on any one of those platforms. So the Jonathan Mooney. It had to be the Jonathan Mooney, not out of arrogance. There just turns out to be a lot of Jonathan Mooneys, right? So I had to put the there, but it's the Jonathan Mooney on all those things. Come say hello to me. I'm always posting cool research that I'm passionate about. I'm always posting where I'm speaking and all that good stuff. So that's a wonderful place to be in dialogue and to be in community. But if that's not your thing, and it's not really my thing, and if you're like me, and you really want to be in dialogue, hit me a email, okay? And so my email is my name. It's one word. It's lowercase. It's Jonathan Mooney, which is Jonathan Mooney. So it's Jonathan Mooney, one word, lowercase, at me, which is just me.com. Okay, so we got the social stuff, the Jonathan Mooney. We got email, jonathanmooney.com. The floor is yours. I got to ask this dude in the front. Is that a Maccabi jersey? What's that jersey?
Haifa City.
Haifa City.
No, it's Maccabi.
No, that's Maccabi right there.
Maccabi Haifa.
We are going in January, and we are going to go see a game. So we are huge soccer fans, and friends of ours from Israel have got us involved in the Israeli soccer world. So anyway, very cool, man. Right on. Sorry about that little tangent we got there. Celebrating a cool jersey in the front, but that's how I roll. What's up?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
What would you tell teachers? And this is a room full of teachers and administrators right now. Like what would you tell them to do tomorrow, tonight, to change this? Because they're holding the keys. We keep pushing, but they're holding the keys.
Yep. And your name?
Shannon.
Shannon. Right on, Shannon. Thanks for being here tonight. I know you all have busy lives, and taking time out of that to be in community to talk about a more inclusive world is a cool thing. What would I say? Well, actually, what I would say is educators as a whole, and us in partnership with educators, need to be holding our systems and the folks who make the public policy around our systems accountable to a more inclusive and universally designed world. Because one of the things that I hear all the time from educators, and this is not to let them off the hook, and I'll come back to their due difference in a second, but one of the things that I hear more than ever, and one of the things I'm actually very optimistic about, because it's been 20 years, you know, I started speaking in the heart of No Child Left Behind. I saw the demoralization of teachers, of parents, of children. And one of the things I'm most optimistic about is there are many educators who want to do the right thing, and they're being constrained by the policies and systems above them around state standardized testing, around a narrow notion of what curriculum exists, where everyone has to be the generalist and there's no room for people to follow areas of interest and passion. Those are policy issues and systems issues that are constraining children, parents, and teachers. So I think the more we see ourselves in the same boat, and the more that we see ourselves as agitating and advocating for some policy change, together, I think we have a better chance of making a profound difference in our systems. I want to give you one policy change now, and then I'm going to come back to the due difference for folks every day, because you're right that there are things that need to be done, can be done, should be done. But before we move off of that, you know, we have never had a fully funded IDEA, never had a fully funded IDA. And this is not a partisan issue. This is both Democratic and Republican administrations have never fully funded the IDA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So as we approach another cycle of presidential politics, as a community, we should be asking, agitating, demanding that we fully fund the IDA, with one caveat, that we fully fund the IDA and we allocate those resources to inclusion and universal design practices. Now we have the ability to start creating a system that creates transformation for the continuum of kids that we know is paradoxically normal. So that's my kind of policy change orientation. But let's go to the ground. Even in a constrained world, even being an educator in an imperfect system, we can still do right, we can still do better. And my message when I have the opportunity to speak to educators around those issues is really twofold. Number one, there is no excuse for not being a Mr. R. There's just no excuse. Like, it doesn't cost money, you know. It doesn't require to change policy. That's an ethical decision you make of how you are going to relate to other human beings. So there is no excuse not to be a Mr. R. And then flip side is there's no excuse to be a Mrs. C. That is pointing at kids saying, what's your problem, you know? There's no systems justification for shame and social stigma being a part of any child's education. And to change those things doesn't require money. It doesn't require a systems revolution. It requires a different ethical practice as an educator. So for me, those are I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, which implies it dismisses the impact it can have, because it's actually profound to wake up every day and say, I'm not going to ever shame difference or shame a kid, and I'm going to always be the person who finds a good in every kid. Those two things are doable. They're doable tonight. They're doable for me. I got to remember that. So I got 3 kids. I tell my kid, what's your problem every night, you know, and I got to go home and check myself, right? Those are doable for me. They're doable for educators. They're doable for all of us. It's an ethical practice that makes a profound impact in the lives of kids. So let's aim high for some systems transformation. Let's do the stuff within our control around how we relate to and treat other human beings in our lives. And that's a powerful brew for a different system and a different world. Right on. What's up, man?
With all the people that you work with and talk to, the one thing I would see, you need to have the self-confidence to take advantage of the empowerment, right?
Yeah.
How do you get the person, especially as they get older and they move on with life, how do you build in that self-confidence to either take advantage of the empowerment that's going on around them, or take advantage of the teacher you had saying, oh, I am different, but have the confidence to move forward with that thinking, because that's hard.
It is, and it's a chicken and egg, and it's a symbiotic relationship. Meaning, the more that you got somebody like Mr. R, the more confidence you have in following your strengths, and those two things are in relationship. But you're right to name the issue of self-confidence and self-concept as being the most important work that you can do. And I use that word self-concept intentionally, because there's been a lot of good research around it. And when I say research around it, we know through empirical studies that young folks who go on a journey of thriving with differences, and I think this is really, really important. I'm proud that I went to Brown University. That's a cool thing for me. It's a cool place. But that does not make me a successful human being. That's not the marker of success. I'm more proud that I've subsequently dedicated 20 years of service and advocacy for other people. That makes me a successful human being. And I'm proud of my 20-year relationship with my wife, and I'm proud of my next 20 years with my wife. I'm proud of the human I am, not the accomplishments I have. And that's really important, because sometimes we narrowly define success as this set of benchmarks, and if you're not that, then you're not successful. So I look at thriving, and one of the reason I use that word is because because there are many successful people who aren't thriving social emotionally. You know, they're struggling. There are many so-called unsuccessful people judged by monetary lenses who are thriving at great lengths. So thriving is our goal. So when we look at thriving for folks with differences, we know that it's not skills, but self-concept. You know, it's not the reading rate, it's not the spelling rate, it's do they not think they're stupid, crazy, and lazy? And so that's really important because it reorients our set of actions as educators or as parents to do things that feed that self-concept. So let me just give you a few things that I know in my own life and I know in the research facilitates self-concept development. Number one is a positive image of a positive future. You know, surrounding them with that image. I'll tell you just a quick story. I had a plan for suicide when I was 12. One of the things that saved my life, if you can call it an intervention, it was different type of intervention, was my mom showed me a videotape. It was something that she had heard about on Dateline, an interview. She taped it and made me watch it. And it was an interview with a young man who was 20 years old, and the young man couldn't read a word and was in college, and his mom read every one of his textbooks to him. Do you have any idea the hope that image gave me? Now, sucks to be the guy's mom, you know, like I got that. I didn't say it was a hopeful image for mom, you know, but it was a hopeful image for me. I saw an image of a positive future. And so Eye to Eye is all about facilitating that, you know. It's all about a different messenger, because I know with my 12-year-old, 13-year-old Max, you know, I try to tell him anything. I'm like the Peanuts dude, you know what I mean? Like, it's not English that I am speaking, you know, and it's not being heard. So we need to find different messengers for those things around an image for a positive future, right? I know that it's really important around self-concept to not just have the rhetoric of strength down, but to walk that talk. And let me explain that. You know, we kind of got good at the rhetoric nowadays of difference, you know, we're all different, we're all special snowflakes, you know, and then the bell rings and it turns into, now sit your special snowflake ass down. I'll tell you what to think, how to think, and when to think, you special snowflake, right? There's a deep hypocrisy around that. And we gotta put our time where our mouth is. And what that means is if we're going to honor interest and talent and we're going to cultivate strength, we need to make it a part of the day. We need to make it a part of the week. We need to make it a part of the month. We need to make it a part of the report card. We need to really honor it in a deep way. And I know that's a hard thing to do because, you know, you get sucked into the remediation machine. You know, I remember that in my life. I remember it around spelling, you know. Man, people tried everything to fix my spelling relentlessly, right? We had flashcards, we had drawn the words in the sand, we had building the words with blocks, we had interpretive dance to get the words in, right? And every Friday, what would happen? I failed the test. Not this one Friday, though. I'll never forget this one Friday. I came on down to the breakfast table, and me and my mom used to do more flashcards, so there were no flashcards. And I said, hey, Mom, what's up? And she said, Jonathan, today we are ditching school and going to the zoo. And every Friday, because the school would not capitulate or accommodate on spelling, me and my mom did what she called Get Good at Something Day. It was the zoo because I loved animals. It was visiting a contractor friend's job site because I loved building. You know, it was a time investment in my interests and talents. And that saved my life, you know. So when we think about building self-concept, when we think about the chicken and the egg of empowerment, we have to have a lens of what does it mean to intentionally build self-concept. It means we give people a positive image of a positive future. It means that we don't just talk about strength and talent, we invest in actually doing it. And then we really honor the reality that people have different paths, you know? One of the things that I'm so demoralized about is this college or die mentality. You know, go to college or you're a failure. That's the message we give kids. I mean, let's be honest about that, you know? And that is so wrong. You look at a country like Denmark or Finland, has the highest performing educational system in the world. And they have multiple options for post-secondary experiences. Not college, experiences. Could be an apprenticeship, could be a certificate, could be a experiential learning. It could be college, right? But there's not this one path for all, and there's one way to be successful. So I think if we challenge that and we are authentically engaged and we help people find not my journey, your journey, but their journey, then we're helping that symbiotic relationship of empowerment, as well as helping people build a better sense of themselves as not stupid, crazy, or lazy. Okay, cool. Up front, yeah. 2 hands, 1 question. 2 hands, 10 questions.
So what are your thoughts on these scales to measure and benchmarks? Because without them, how else would the child qualify for services?
Yeah, and your name?
Michelle.
Michelle asked a really astute and important question that I see as 2 questions. So the question was, what are my thoughts around these scales and benchmarks that are used to qualify for services? I'm actually going to split those 2 things for a second. Let me talk about scales and benchmarks and psychometric testing. You know, nothing embodies more the social history of normal than those psychometric testing. Those psychometric testing emerged in the 1860s when the word normal first emerged in the English language, which is an amazing thing to realize, that this idea that we think is natural, always has been, always will, is less than, 200 years old. It hasn't always been, it won't always be. So psychometric testing is based on averages, which we know by definition are fictional, right? The average family size in America is 2.5 kids. Y'all ever seen the 0.5 kid? That tells you right there what we're dealing with, right? This whole abstraction applied to the messiness of real life. So it's important that we take all of those with a grain of salt. And it's important that we understand more than ever, there is research that shows us that those are not always predictive of what somebody can become. There's really great research around late blooming, specifically for the neurodiverse. When I was a kid, my mom used to read to me the book that's on the table out there, a book called Leo the Late Bloomer. If you don't know Leo the Late Bloomer, you got to know it. It's a beautiful book. It's about a lion that can't do things, blooms later in life. It's a book for like 4-year-olds, and my mom read it to me every morning until I was 18 years old, okay? Because the message was, you'll hit your stride. And no matter what the WASC intelligence test said, you will hit your stride. And my mom was right. I'll quote from a research study from McGill University and the NIH, National Institute of Health, about ADD. And this is a direct quote. ADHD is not a deficit, it's a maturation delay. It's a late blooming brain. So we got to take those scales with a grain of salt, understand that they can be useful, sometimes harmful, other times they're fictional averages that don't capture what's right or good in any human being. Now let's talk about qualifying for services. Hey, we got to play the game, and that's the challenging part, We have constructed a system where to have your individual needs met, you need to pathologize yourself. And one could say that that is partly to keep the standardizing system in place because it's hard, costly, and it treats as a scarce resource the right to learn in a way that's right for you. And that's the reality that we're in. And I think we need to survive the system that we're in, manage the system that we're in, at the same time advocate for a different vision of what could be. And that goes back to what I was saying around IDEA resources being applied for universal design. In an optimal world, we would be individualizing experiences, personalizing education for the continuum of human beings with the goal of inclusion opposed to segregation for differences. But we're not there, so we got to survive the system that we're in and agitate for a system that is different moving forward. Got to walk and chew gum and do both. Okay, I'm going to hang out until they kick us out, which I think is at like 9 o'clock. But my thank yous again to SEPAC, the thank yous to the library, but more importantly, my thank you to you all Tuesday night hanging out, imagining a more inclusive world. That's inspiring and that's real change. So thank you all very much. Come say hello.